When God gives you an assignment, He always makes a way for you to complete that assignment, and He's faithful, and He will equip you with everything that you need. And there's always going to be a preparation period, and we have to know that God does things in His own timing, and we should never take matters into our own hands and try to make things happen our way. We want to submit to the will of God and do things God's way. And when we do that, it all works out because our purpose is why we were created. And it doesn't matter who you are, you don't have to be in ministry. God created everybody with an assignment, and it's up to us to seek the Lord and find out what it is that He is requiring us to do. And we always want to meet that requirement through the power of God. As always, it is such a pleasure to present to you the Sanctuary Sunday School. And I'm so excited because for season 3, we are seeing record numbers. We've never had audiences this large before. So thank you so much. So if this is your first time, tap that bell, subscribe so that you don't miss anything. I'm going to be going live more. Plus, we're also launching a series of animated videos for children. So stick around with us. And once again, thank you. This week's subject is a comfortable exile, and it's in the book of Exodus. And here we are talking about Moses. Now, last week we talked about Moses and how his mother saved his life, and he was taken into the palace by the princess. And so that's significant because this is all part of God's preparation of Moses to deliver his people. And we see by him being raised in that environment, he had the best education and he had the finest clothing, and he learned the ins and outs of the rulers of Egypt. And that information, that preparation would help him when it came time for him to come back and come against Egypt in order to deliver his people, because now he had inside information. It's just amazing the way that God sets things up. So we see that Moses grew up and he was aware that he was Hebrew. So he kind of had the best of both worlds. He was aware that he was Hebrew because the princess had hired his mother to nurse him as a baby. So he had the Hebrew culture and he also had the Egyptian culture. And so it says that he went out to see about his brethren. Now, when you look at that, by him being raised the way that he probably was aware of the afflictions of his people, but did not witness it firsthand day to day, and definitely did not experience it because of where he was raised. And so he went out there, and it says that he saw an Egyptian hit a Hebrew, and something rose up in him, and he killed the Egyptian, and put him in the sand, buried him in the sand. And I thought about that because there's a saying in the world that says blood is thicker than water, and he was still a Hebrew by blood, and he had the blood of Abraham coursing through his veins, and he wanted to deliver or relieve that oppression. And so he jumped in the moment and he killed this Egyptian. And so then he saw two of his brethren, two Hebrews, that were arguing, and he approached them. He said, "Why would you be fighting each other?" And one of the Hebrews said to him, he said, "Look, what are you going to do about it? Who are you to judge us? What you going to do? Kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" And that's when Moses realized two things. First of all, that they saw him and that they would probably tell, and so that people knew that he had killed that Egyptian. That was the first thing. Second thing is that he wasn't really received by the people. So it was kind of like he was displaced because now that he's killed an Egyptian, he can't go back to the palace. And then now his people, as he could see, they're not going to cover for him, they're not going to hide him. So he really had no place to be. And that's when Moses had to leave Egypt. And I thought about that because sometimes when we're in life, we end up in that position where we're torn, and it feels like there's really no place where we're accepted. We don't know who to trust. We don't know who we can depend on. We don't know who to go to. And it is in that point that we have to depend solely on God. And I want to think about this because sometimes I don't want to just glaze over the fact that Moses had to leave Egypt, because That's all he knew was Egypt. He didn't know what to do. He had to leave everybody that he cared anything about and go out on his own alone. And that can be terrifying, but it's also encouraging because there are times when you've got to walk alone and you can't really rely on anybody around you, but you've got to focus on God and just rely on God to take care of you. So he went out there. And then it says he came across a group of sisters, and there were shepherds there, that were giving them a hard time. And Moses rose up and he helped them. And so then apparently this is something that these young ladies have been going through often, because when they got back, their father said, well, why'd you get back so fast this time? And then they said, this Egyptian helped us. Now they referred to Moses as an Egyptian, which indicates that he probably was still a child, had on Egyptian attire. And even the way that they wore their hair, there were distinctions in the way that the Egyptians looked and in the way that the Hebrews, the children of Israel, looked. And so you have the children of Israel who were down in Egypt. And then you have these women. Now, it just so happened that the women that he met, they were also descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. He ended up in Midian, and these were the Midianites. So Moses ended up still among his kinsmen. And when I looked at that, how God, he just really knows how to set things up. And sometimes it looks like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I done messed up. It's all over. Moses had his palace upbringing. So he had all of that from being in Pharaoh's house with Pharaoh's daughter. And now God has placed him with his people. And then he ended up marrying Zipporah, and they had a son. And so he was there, and he was living a nice lifestyle, and he was content to be there. See, that's the thing about God. Just when you get comfortable, just when you feel like, okay, I'm good, I got this, that's when he will call you out and say, nope, time to go. And so he was there, and he was in Midian. He was settled. But then our lesson goes back to Egypt. And it says that God heard his people. It says three things that God did. First, he heard their groanings. Then he remembered the covenant. Then it says he looked upon them. And so now we have God looking at his people. And that's another lesson for us, that when it feels like it's just so heavy, right? When the load gets so bad until you feel like you can't take it anymore, that's the time to depend on God, because he will remember you, because he will hear you, and he'll look upon you, and he'll deliver. And so it says here that, well, we know that when Moses killed the Egyptian, now the king wanted to kill Moses, but now that king had died. And so you see how God is working everything out, and he's positioning it, and he's setting up. So Moses was prepared in Egypt. Now he's in Midian, getting himself together. And as we move through these lessons, we'll see how Moses came back to deliver the people. And I say this so much, but it is so true when we're looking back, looking at these lessons and looking at what God did, and how faithful he is to his people and how he delivered. How can we help but serve God? How can we help but trust God? Because God is so powerful, and God is so good, and God is so loving. And see, he talked about this comfort, and then we talked about a comfortable exile. And then if you pick it up, Jesus picked it up in the New Testament. He said, I'm going away, but I'm not going to leave you comfortless. I'm going to send back the Holy Ghost, which is the comforter. See, we have that comforter. So we have that same level of comfort that God provided for Moses. So even when it feels like you've come to the end of your rope, even when you have no idea what you're going to do or how you're going to do it, when you don't understand why you've got to go through what you're going through, remember there is a comforter, the Holy Ghost. It lives down inside of you, and it keeps you. It keeps you in the will of God. It keeps you living right and doing right and trusting God, and it will lead you and guide you through everything that it is. And if you have not accepted the Holy Ghost into your life, do it right now. Open up your heart and allow the Spirit of God to live inside of you and move through you, so that God can use you like he used Moses, so that God will be able to hear you when you call him, so that God can remember his covenant, and so that God can look up on you. God look up on us with compassion, because he is the everlasting Father and the God. It says the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's the God of Volante. He's the God of you, whatever your name may be, because that is who God is, and He is still making the way. He is still delivering. So, whatever you do, whatever your situation may be, give it to God right now and focus on making sure that you do what it is that God has assigned to you, and just be willing to say, yes, Lord. Just say, yes, Lord, and submit to the will of God, and He will always take care of you.